Hey everyone, before we jump in, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and the time you tuned in. It really helps the algorithm recommend more stories like this to you. Alright, let's get started. Most people don't realize how isolated you get driving trucks for a living. It was late October 2022 and I'd been hauling freight across the Midwest for about 8 years at that point. The job suited me fine. Decent pay, lots of time alone with my thoughts, and I got to see parts of the country most folks never do. I was 43, divorced, living in a small apartment outside Columbus, Ohio. That particular week had been routine runs, nothing special, until dispatch called me Thursday afternoon with a last-minute delivery. Some agricultural equipment heading out to a farm about 2 hours from Des Moines needed to arrive that same night. The pay was double the usual rate because of the rush, and honestly, I needed the extra cash with the holidays coming up. Should have been my first warning sign, but money has a way of making you ignore your instincts. The address they gave me led to this property way out past civilization where the paved roads turned to gravel and then to dirt. My GPS kept recalculating, trying to figure out where the hell I was supposed to go. Around 9:30 that night, I finally found the place. A massive wooden gate with Donovan Farm painted on a crooked sign that looked like it hadn't been touched since the 70s. The client, a guy named Mr. Donovan, had called me 3 times already to make sure I was still coming. His voice had this weird urgency to it, kept saying they absolutely needed the equipment tonight. Couldn't wait until morning. When I pulled through that gate, my headlights swept across empty fields on both sides. Dead corn stalks standing like soldiers in neat rows. The main house sat about a quarter mile back from the road, completely dark except for one window glowing yellow on the second floor. But the delivery instructions said to bring everything to the barn, another half-mile past the house, deeper into the property. The barn was this enormous red structure, probably built in the 40s or 50s, with those old-style sliding doors that must have been 20 foot tall. Mr. Donovan was already waiting outside when I pulled up, standing under a single floodlight that barely pushed back the darkness around us. He was maybe 60, wearing overalls and a flannel shirt that hung loose on his skinny frame. What struck me most were his eyes. They kept darting around, never staying on me for more than a second before checking the darkness behind the barn. Then the truck, then back to the shadows. He walked up before I even got out of the cab, talking fast about how grateful he was that I made it, how important this delivery was for their operation. The way he said operation stuck with me. Not farm, not business, operation. He kept wringing his hands while he talked, and I noticed dirt caked under his fingernails. The kind that gets so deep it becomes part of your skin. I backed the trailer up to the barn doors like he asked, and that's when things started getting weird. Usually clients have their own people to help unload, especially for heavy equipment. But Mr. Donovan insisted it was just him and me. Said his workers had gone home for the day, but he couldn't wait until morning to get this stuff unloaded. The cargo was 3 large crates of what the manifest listed as agricultural processing equipment, each one probably weighing around 800 pounds. No way 2 people could move those without proper equipment. When I mentioned this, he quickly said he had a forklift inside the barn. We just needed to open the crates first and carry the smaller components in piece by piece. That didn't make any sense to me. Why would you break down equipment before moving it to where you're going to assemble it? But he was already pulling out a crowbar, heading toward the first crate, so I grabbed my work gloves and followed him. The overtime pay was too good to start asking too many questions. We got the first crate open, and inside were definitely machine parts, steel frames, conveyor components, some kind of grinding mechanism. Nothing unusual there. Mr. Donovan grabbed one end of a frame piece, motioning for me to take the other. The barn doors were already open, just a black rectangle waiting for us. As we carried that first piece toward the entrance, he started talking again, his voice echoing weird in the night air. He was going on about how they were expanding their operation, how they needed more processing capacity, how business was booming, but everything about the place screamed the opposite. No fresh tire tracks except mine. No lights in any of the outbuildings. No signs anyone had worked this land in months. We stepped through those barn doors and immediately the smell hit me. It was this mix of old hay, motor oil, and something else underneath. Something sharp and metallic that made me breathe through my mouth. The only light came from a single bulb hanging from a beam about 30 feet in, leaving most of the barn in complete darkness. That's when I heard it. A slight shuffling sound from somewhere deeper in the barn. Not loud, but definitely there, like boots on concrete trying to be quiet. I stopped walking, still holding my end of the frame. Mr. Donovan immediately started talking louder, almost frantically about where we should put the equipment, pointing toward the darkness with his free hand. But I was focused on letting my eyes adjust. And that's when I saw them. Shadows that weren't quite right. Human-shaped forms standing perfectly still against the far wall. At first, I thought maybe they were just equipment or hay bales, but then one of them shifted slightly, just a small movement like someone adjusting their weight from one foot to the other. There were at least 4 of them that I could make out, maybe more further back. They were just standing there in the dark waiting. Mr. Donovan was still talking, his voice getting higher, more desperate, saying we should go further in, that the forklift was in the back. We just needed to walk past the old stalls to get to it. Every instinct I'd developed in 20 years of adult life was screaming at me to get out of there. I set down my end of the frame, nice and calm, and told Mr. Donovan I needed to check something in my truck real quick. His whole face changed. The nervous energy turned into something harder, meaner. He said, "We were almost done, just needed to get the equipment inside." But his hand moved to his pocket and I could see the outline of something there. The shadows in the back started moving forward, slow and deliberate, spreading out to block any path deeper into the barn. One of them knocked over something metal. It clanged against the concrete floor and echoed through the space. Mr. Donovan dropped his end of the frame with a crash and took a step toward me, saying I couldn't leave yet, that we had a deal. His voice had completely changed. No more nervous farmer act. It was cold, controlled, like he'd done this before and knew exactly how it was supposed to go. I didn't run. Running would have triggered whatever they had planned. Instead, I backed up steady and smooth, keeping my eyes on Mr. Donovan while tracking the shadows in my peripheral vision. Told him I had a tire pressure warning light. Needed to check it before the trailer shifted and damaged his equipment. Professional concern, you know. He hesitated for just a second, probably trying to figure out if I was playing along or making an escape. That hesitation was all I needed. I kept backing up out through those barn doors, my boots crunching on the gravel. The shadows inside were moving faster now, and I could hear voices low and urgent. Mr. Donovan followed me out, still trying to convince me to come back in, saying his nephews just wanted to help with the unloading. That's all. Nephews, right? Nephews who hide in the dark and wait for truckers to walk into the back of barns. When I got to my cab door, he grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard through my jacket. His other hand was pulling something from his pocket, and I didn't wait to see what it was. I yanked my arm free and shoved him back hard enough that he stumbled and fell against the trailer. Then I was in the cab, slamming the door and hitting the locks in one motion. Mr. Donovan was back on his feet immediately, pounding on my door, yelling that I couldn't leave with his equipment. Through the side mirror, I could see 3 men had come out of the barn. All of them built like they spent their days throwing hay bales, and they were jogging toward the truck. I fired up the engine, and that beautiful diesel roar never sounded so good. Mr. Donovan jumped onto my running board, trying to pull the door handle, his face pressed against the window. I could see his teeth, yellow and crooked, as he shouted threats about what would happen if I left. The 3 men were almost at the truck now, and one of them was carrying what looked like a crowbar. I dropped it into gear and started rolling forward, slow at first. Mr. Donovan held on for maybe 10 feet before he had to let go or get pulled under the wheels. The smart thing would have been to just drive straight out, but I needed to unhook that trailer. No way I was leaving them with $800,000 worth of equipment to maybe fence or use as bait for the next driver. I pulled forward about 50 yards, jumped out with my pin puller, and had that fifth wheel uncoupled in record time. The men were running toward me now, actually running, and I could hear Mr. Donovan shouting instructions to them. Something about the truck. Don't let him leave with the truck. That's when it clicked. They didn't want the cargo at all. They wanted my rig. Probably planned to knock me out or worse in that barn. Take the truck and leave me and the empty trailer to rot on this property. I jumped back in the cab just as the first guy reached me, his crowbar swinging toward my windshield. The glass spiderwebbed but held as I gunned it, leaving them all in a cloud of dust and diesel exhaust. In my mirrors, I could see them standing there in the headlight beams from the abandoned trailer. Mr. Donovan still yelling, waving his arms like a madman. I drove straight through that wooden gate without slowing down, pieces of it flying everywhere, and didn't stop until I hit the main highway. Then I pulled into the first well-lit truck stop I found and called 911. The sheriff's deputy, who showed up, took my statement, looked at the damaged windshield, and said he'd check it out. But his expression told me everything. This wasn't his first call about something weird happening out on those back roads. He asked me if I could identify any of the men besides Mr. Donovan, and I gave him what details I could remember. He wrote it all down, said they'd investigate, but warned me that by the time they got out there, the place would probably be cleaned up, looking like a normal farm again. These people knew how to play the game. He said they'd have some story ready about a disagreement over payment, maybe even file a complaint against me for stealing their equipment. The deputy suggested I call my dispatcher, report everything to my company, and maybe avoid deliveries to isolated farms for a while. The next morning, my dispatcher called me, mad as hell, but not at me. Turns out the shipping company that contracted the delivery didn't exist. The paperwork was fake. The payment authorization was from a stolen credit card, and the phone number Mr. Donovan had been calling from was a burner. The whole thing was a setup from the start. But here's what really got to me. When I started asking around at truck stops, talking to other drivers, I heard stories. Similar situations, always at night, always isolated farms or warehouses, always urgent deliveries with premium pay. Most drivers who took those jobs and actually went through with going into the buildings were reported as missing. Their trucks found abandoned states away, stripped clean. The drivers themselves never found. The FBI apparently had a task force on it, but these operations moved around. Different states, different names, always one step ahead. I was lucky. Lucky I noticed those shadows. Lucky I trusted my gut. Lucky I got out when I did. Now I stick to daytime deliveries, established companies only, and if something pays too good to be true, I remember that night at the Donovan farm and pass on the job. Some money just isn't worth it. I need to tell someone about what happened to me last Wednesday night on Highway 50 because I'm still trying to process it myself. I'm a long-haul trucker. Been driving 18-wheelers for about 12 years now. Mostly running freight between Nevada and Colorado. The name's Martin, and I usually pride myself on being pretty level-headed. You have to be when you're hauling 60,000 pounds of cargo through mountain passes and desert stretches. That particular night, I was carrying a load of electronics from Reno to Denver. Nothing too valuable, but enough to make me cautious. I'd left Reno around 6 o'clock in the evening, planning to drive through the night since traffic would be lighter and I could make better time. My wife Joanna was expecting me home by Friday afternoon, and I wanted to grab some sleep at the depot before heading to our place in Aurora. The weather was clear, just a regular November evening with temperatures dropping, but no snow in the forecast. Highway 50 through Nevada is called the loneliest road in America for good reason. You can drive for hours without seeing another soul. Just endless stretches of sagebrush and distant mountains. I actually prefer it that way most times. Gives me space to think, listen to podcasts, maybe call Joanna when I hit the spots with decent cell coverage. Around 9:30 that night, I was about 40 miles east of Austin, Nevada, when I first noticed the headlights in my mirrors. Now, seeing another truck on Highway 50 isn't unusual. Plenty of us use it as an alternative to I-80, but something about this one caught my attention right away. It was a Peterbilt. Looked like a 579 model from what I could tell. Painted solid black with no company logos. No dot numbers visible. Nothing. The trailer was one of those refrigerated units, also black, which struck me as odd because most reefer units are white or silver to reflect heat. The whole setup looked expensive. Custom maybe, but completely anonymous. I figured it was probably some owner-operator who liked to keep things low-key, though in 12 years of driving, I'd never seen a completely unmarked commercial rig. At first, I didn't think much of it. The guy was maintaining a decent following distance, maybe 300 foot back, which is respectful spacing for night driving. But after about 20 minutes, I started getting this uncomfortable feeling in my gut. See, when you're driving long haul, you develop a rhythm, a pattern to your speed. Sometimes you'll push 70 on the straightaways, drop to 65 on the grades, maybe slow to 55 around the sharper curves. Most truckers behind you will either match your average speed and gradually fall back, or they'll find their own pace and eventually pass. But this black rig, it was matching me move for move like we were connected by an invisible cable. When I'd ease up to 72, I'd watch those headlights in my mirror slowly creep up to maintain that same 300 feet gap. When I'd test it by dropping to 60, those lights would fade back, keeping the distance perfect. After 30 minutes of this, I knew something wasn't right. I tried to get a look at the driver when we passed under the occasional street light near the small towns, but the cab windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see anything inside. The thing that really started bothering me was how quiet my CB radio had gotten. Usually, even on Highway 50, you'll catch some chatter. Maybe someone complaining about speed traps or warning about deer on the road. But ever since that black truck appeared, my CB had been dead silent except for static. I tried calling out a few times standard stuff like westbound, you got your ears on, but got nothing back. Even tried switching channels, thinking maybe my radio was acting up, but every frequency was the same. Just that low, empty hiss. I grabbed my phone to call Joanna, let her know I was running on schedule, but I had no signal, which wasn't unusual for that stretch. Still, the combination of the silent CB and that truck maintaining perfect distance was making the hair on my neck prickle. About an hour into this strange dance, I decided to test something. There's a way station near Eastgate that's usually closed at night, but it has a wide pull-off area where truckers sometimes stop to check their loads or grab a quick nap. I put on my turn signal way early, giving plenty of warning, and started slowing down for the exit. Sure enough, those headlights behind me started blinking, left turn signal matching mine. My mouth went dry as I watched this happen. I kept slowing, dropped to about 40, then 35 as I approached the off-ramp, but at the last second, I canceled my signal and accelerated back onto the highway, pushing my rig harder than I usually would. The black truck followed my exact move. Canceled signal, smooth acceleration, right back to that 300 feet distance. That's when I knew for certain this wasn't coincidence or some driver who just happened to be going my way. This person was deliberately following me. Had been for over 50 miles now. My mind started racing through possibilities. None of them good. Maybe someone knew what I was hauling. Electronics aren't drugs or guns, but a trailer full of laptops and tablets could be worth decent money to the right fence. Or maybe this was something else entirely, something worse. I'd heard stories at truck stops, drivers talking about rigs that would follow you until you stopped, then bad things would happen. Hijackings where they'd beat you half to death and leave you in the desert. Some guys even claimed there were crews that would force you off the road in remote spots, make it look like you'd fallen asleep at the wheel. I'd always figured those were just trucker tales, stories that got bigger with each telling. But sitting there with that black rig glued to my bumper, those stories didn't seem so far-fetched anymore. The stretch of road ahead was particularly desolate. Wouldn't see another town for 30 miles, and cell coverage was non-existent. I started doing the math in my head. I had about 3/4 of a tank, enough to make it to Ely without stopping, but that was still almost 2 hours away. The nearest rest stop was about 40 minutes ahead, one of those basic pull-offs with bathrooms and a couple of parking spots for semis. I'd stopped there before, remembered it being poorly lit with no security cameras, just a lonely spot in the middle of nowhere. No way was I pulling in there with this black rig on my tail. I kept checking my mirrors, hoping to see some identifying mark on the truck. Maybe catch a glimpse of a license plate when we went around curves and the angle changed. But whoever was driving that thing knew what they were doing. Stayed perfectly centered in the lane. Never gave me a different view. The only thing I could make out was a small red LED light on the dashboard glowing like a little eye watching me. Even the marker lights on the trailer were dim, barely legal, just bright enough to avoid getting pulled over, but not bright enough to illuminate any details. Then something happened that made my whole body tense up. We were coming up on a section where Highway 50 intersects with Route 376, and there's a small gas station there, one of those old mom and pop places that closes at 10 o'clock, but leaves the lights on for the self-service pumps. As we approached, I saw another semi parked by the pumps, a white Freightliner with Anderson Logistics painted on the side. The driver was outside. Looked like he was checking his tires with a flashlight. I started flashing my high beams frantically, hoping he'd look up, maybe see something was wrong. The guy did look up, shielded his eyes from my lights, and I saw him take a step toward the road like he was trying to figure out what my problem was. But as soon as we passed, I watched in my mirror as the black rig's high beam suddenly blazed to life, aimed directly at the other driver. The man stumbled backward, and I saw him drop his flashlight. Those high beams stayed on for maybe 5 seconds, then went dark again. When I looked back at the road, my knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel so hard. The next 20 minutes felt like hours. I kept glancing between the road ahead and my mirrors, watching those headlights maintain their perfect distance. My shirt was soaked with sweat even though I had the AC running. I tried the CB again, scanning through all 40 channels, but it was still dead. That's when I remembered something. My nephew had given me a dash cam last Christmas, one of those dual camera setups that records both front and rear. I'd installed it, but honestly forgot about it most of the time. The memory card could hold about 6 hours of footage before it started overwriting. I reached up and made sure the little red recording light was on, then adjusted my rear view mirror slightly to make sure it was catching the black rig. At least if something happened, there'd be evidence. The thought of if something happened made me want to vomit. I'd been in close calls before, tire blowouts, ice storms, even had a drunk driver sideswipe me once near Salt Lake City. But this was different. This was deliberate, calculated, patient. Whoever was in that truck was waiting for something, and I had a sick feeling I knew what. Finally, I saw the sign for the Hick Ice and Rest area coming up 2 miles. It wasn't much, just a pull-off with some picnic tables and basic facilities. But I remembered it had something important. A clear view of the road in both directions and enough space to turn around quickly if needed. More importantly, it was on a slight hill, which meant I'd have the high ground if things went bad. I know that sounds paranoid, but when you've got 70 miles of nothing in every direction, and someone's been stalking you for over an hour, paranoid starts feeling pretty rational. I made my decision quickly. No signal this time, just suddenly veered toward the exit at the last possible moment. The black rig's brakes locked up behind me. I heard the squeal even over my own engine, and for a second I thought it might jackknife trying to follow. But the driver recovered, wrestling that monster onto the exit ramp behind me. As I pulled into the rest area, my headlights swept across the empty parking area. No other vehicles, no witnesses, just me and whoever was about to follow me in. I positioned my truck strategically, nose pointed toward the exit, engine still running. Then I waited, watching in my mirrors as the black rig slowly rolled into the rest area and stopped about 50 feet behind me, engine idling with a low, menacing rumble. We sat there for what must have been 5 minutes, though it felt like an eternity. Neither of us moved. neither shut off our engines. I could see the silhouette of someone in the driver's seat of the black rig, but the tinted windows still prevented me from making out any features. They just sat there waiting, watching. I had my phone in my hand, praying for even one bar of signal, but got nothing. Then I noticed something that made my chest tighten. A second figure moving inside the cab, shifting from the sleeper berth to the passenger seat. There were two of them. My mind raced through my options. I couldn't outrun them. Their rig looked newer and probably had more horsepower. Fighting was out of the question. I'm 53 years old with a bad knee, and there were two of them. I kept my hand on the gear shift, ready to slam it into drive if either of them opened a door. The waiting was excruciating. I could hear my own heartbeat over the rumble of the engines. Then, suddenly, their CB crackled to life, not with words, but with this strange clicking sound, rhythmic, almost like Morse code, but not quite. Click, click, pause, click, 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 pause, click. It went on for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. I didn't know what it meant, but it felt like a countdown, or worse, a signal to someone else. That's when I saw the headlights approaching from the west, another vehicle coming fast. As it got closer, I realized it was a Nevada Highway Patrol cruiser. I'd never been so happy to see those lights in my life. I immediately started flashing my high beams and hit my air horn 3 times, the universal trucker signal for distress. The patrol car slowed, pulled into the rest area, and positioned itself between me and the black rig, those LED light bars illuminating everything in harsh blue and white. The officer got out, hand resting on his sidearm, and walked toward the black truck. I watched him knock on the driver's window, saw it roll down just a few inches. They talked for maybe 2 minutes, though I couldn't hear what was said. The officer walked around the rig, shining his flashlight on the sides, and I saw him pause at the back of the trailer, taking photos with his phone. Then he came over to me. Officer Colton, according to his name tag, mid-30s, looked dead serious, asked if I was all right, if these guys had threatened me. I told him everything, the following, the synchronized movements, the intimidation at the gas station. He nodded, told me he'd gotten 2 other reports that week about a black semi following drivers on Highway 50, though I was the first one who'd actually stopped. He said the plates came back registered to a shell company that didn't really exist, and they'd been trying to catch these guys for weeks. Apparently, 3 drivers in the last month had been robbed after being followed, forced off the road in remote spots, beaten, cargo stolen. He told me to wait while he called for backup. Within 15 minutes, 2 more patrol cars arrived and the rest area looked like a crime scene with all the flashing lights. The officers surrounded the black rig, weapons drawn, ordering the occupants out. Through my mirrors, I watched 2 men exit the cab, hands raised. The driver was tall, maybe 6 feet 4 inches, wearing a gray hoodie and jeans, completely unremarkable except for a neck tattoo that looked like barbed wire. The passenger was shorter, stockier, had a shaved head, and wore a leather jacket despite the cold. Both looked calm, almost amused, like this was just a minor inconvenience. The officers cuffed them, and one started searching the cab while another checked the trailer. That's when things got interesting. Officer Colton came back to me, told me they found something in the cab, a notebook with detailed logs of trucks they'd been following. License plates, cargo manifests, somehow obtained illegally, driver names, home addresses, regular routes. My information was in there, down to my wife's name and our address in Aurora. They even had notes about when I usually stopped for fuel and which rest areas I preferred. The trailer was empty except for some tools that looked like they were meant for breaking into other trailers. Bolt cutters, crowbars, some kind of electronic device that Colton said was probably for disrupting trailer GPS units. These guys were professionals, had been doing this for who knows how long. The investigation took another 2 hours with officers taking my statement, copying my dash cam footage, and documenting everything. They told me the 2 men were already wanted in connection with similar crimes in Utah and Arizona. part of a larger ring that targeted long-haul truckers carrying electronics and pharmaceuticals. The black rig was one of 3 they operated. All identical, all registered to fake companies. They'd follow a target for hours, learning their patterns, waiting for the perfect spot to strike. If I hadn't pulled into that rest area, if that patrol car hadn't shown up, they probably would have tried to run me off the road somewhere in the desert between there and Ely. Officer Colton gave me his card, said I'd need to testify eventually, but for now I was free to go. He offered to escort me to the county line, which I gratefully accepted. As I pulled out of that rest area, following the patrol car with my legs still shaking from adrenaline, I looked back one more time at the black rig, now surrounded by police tape and floodlights. The 2 men were already in separate patrol cars, and I never did learn their names. Didn't want to. I made it to Denver without further incident, hugged Joanna longer than usual when I got home, and took a week off before my next run. I still drive Highway 50 sometimes. It's part of my regular route. But now I've got a loaded Glock in my cab, completely legal with my concealed carry permit. And every time I see headlights appear in my mirror on those lonely stretches, my pulse quickens just a little, wondering if it's starting all over again. The rain had been hammering my windshield for the past 3 hours, and I was running on nothing but black coffee and whatever energy bars I'd grabbed at the last truck stop. I'd been hauling freight cross-country for about 12 years at that point, mostly electronics from warehouses in California, heading east. That particular night in early September 2016, I was pushing through the mountains somewhere between Sacramento and Lake Tahoe, trying to make my delivery deadline in Elko. The CB radio kept crackling with static, and I remember thinking how the weather was getting worse by the minute. My wife Amy had called earlier, telling me our daughter Sophia had won her spelling bee at school, and I was feeling that familiar ache of missing another milestone. I'd promised them both I'd be home by the weekend, and I was determined to keep that promise, which meant pushing through despite the storm. The particular stretch of highway I was on had these brutal switchbacks that even experienced drivers hated, especially in weather like that. My rig was loaded heavy, about 78,000 pounds total, and the rain was making the asphalt slick as oil. I turned down my music and was gripping the wheel tight, keeping her steady at about 35 miles per hour through the curves. The headlights were cutting through sheets of rain, and visibility was maybe 30 feet at best. I kept checking my mirrors, making sure my trailer wasn't sliding when I came around this particularly nasty bend that the locals apparently called Dead Man's Curve. The road curved sharply to the right with a sheer rock wall on one side and nothing but darkness and a steep drop on the other. That's when I saw them. 3 small figures standing right in the middle of my lane, not moving, just standing there in the downpour like they were waiting for something. Every instinct I had from years of driving kicked in at once. I yanked the wheel hard to the left while hitting the brakes, but not too hard. Jackknifing a fully loaded semi on a wet mountain road would have been a death sentence. The figures didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even react to my horn blaring or the massive 18-wheeler barreling toward them. They looked like kids, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing what appeared to be yellow raincoats that were way too bright, almost glowing in my headlights. Their faces were turned down, hidden under the hoods, and their arms hung straight at their sides in this unnatural way that made my chest tighten. The truck started sliding sideways, the trailer pushing me toward the guardrail, and I could hear the tires screaming against the wet pavement. I managed to thread the needle between those figures and the rock wall, missing them by inches, feeling the entire rig shudder as I fought to keep control. Once I cleared them, I immediately started looking for a place to pull over, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it over the engine. There was a small turnout about a quarter mile ahead, barely big enough for my rig, but I made it work. I grabbed my flashlight and my phone, already dialing 911 while jumping out of the cab. The rain soaked through my jacket instantly, but I had to go back and check on those kids. The dispatcher answered, and I was practically shouting about children standing in the road during a storm, giving her the mile marker and everything. She said she'd send a patrol car immediately and told me to stay in my vehicle for safety. But I was already jogging back along the shoulder, my flashlight beam cutting through the rain. When I reached the spot where I'd seen them, there was nothing. No kids, no raincoats, no sign anyone had been there at all. I searched both sides of the road, calling out, thinking maybe they'd run into the woods, but the only sound was rain hitting leaves and the distant rumble of thunder. The state trooper showed up about 20 minutes later, a younger guy named Officer Ramirez, who looked genuinely concerned when I explained what happened. He had me show him the exact spot, and we both searched the area with our flashlights while the rain kept coming down. He examined the skid marks my truck had left, took photos, and kept asking me detailed questions about what I'd seen. What really got me was when he asked me to describe the children's faces, and I realized I couldn't. Those hoods had hidden everything. And thinking back, they'd never looked up, not even when 18 wheels and 40 tons of metal came sliding toward them. Officer Ramirez got quiet for a moment, then asked me to follow him back to my truck. He pulled out his notepad and showed me a list of dates going back 2 years. Each entry was another driver reporting the same thing. Children in yellow raincoats, always in groups of 3, always at that exact curve, always disappearing without a trace. "We've had 4 accidents here in the last 18 months, he told me, his voice barely audible over the rain drumming on my cab's roof. Drivers swerving to avoid kids that aren't there when we arrive. 2 of them went through the guardrail." He pointed toward the edge where the mountain dropped away into blackness, and I felt my mouth go dry, thinking about how close I'd come to joining that statistic. He explained that after the 3rd accident, they'd installed cameras at both ends of the curve, hoping to catch whatever was happening on video. The footage never showed any children, but it did catch something else about a month ago. A beat-up white van parked just around the blind side of the curve at 2 a.m., and someone dragging what looked like mannequins onto the road. By the time patrol units arrived, the van was gone, and so were the mannequins. Officer Ramirez pulled up a grainy photo on his phone showing 3 child-sized figures in yellow rain gear positioned exactly where I'd seen them, except these were clearly artificial with rigid limbs and faces that were just blank plastic heads under those hoods. The officer explained that they suspected it was either insurance fraud or something worse, cargo theft. Make a driver crash or stop suddenly. Then, while everyone's dealing with the accident or searching for injured kids, accomplices raid the trailer. He mentioned they'd found evidence of break-ins on 2 of the crashed trucks, though the drivers hadn't survived to confirm what was taken. The mannequins were weighted at the base, he said, designed to stand upright even in strong wind. And the yellow raincoats were made from some kind of reflective material that lit up like crazy under headlights. Whoever was doing this had put serious thought into the setup. They knew exactly where to place them for maximum effect, right at the sharpest point of the curve where drivers would have the least time to react and the most dangerous options for evasive maneuvers. Officer Ramirez asked me to check my trailer locks and seals. And sure enough, there were fresh scratches around the locking mechanism, like someone had been working on it with tools before something interrupted them. That's when we heard another truck coming up the mountain, the distant roar of a diesel engine fighting the grade. Officer Ramirez immediately got on his radio, calling for the nearest unit to stop all commercial traffic on this section until we could clear the scene. But the sound was getting closer fast, and we both knew the driver wouldn't see our vehicles until they came around that curve. The officer ran to his patrol car and hit every light he had. The whole area lit up blue and red like a carnival, reflecting off the rain and the rock walls. I grabbed my emergency flares from the cab and started running back toward the curve, igniting them as I went, throwing them onto the road to create a warning trail. We could hear the truck's Jake brake engaging, that distinctive stuttering roar echoing off the mountains, which meant the driver had seen something and was trying to slow down. The truck came around the corner doing maybe 25, slow enough to stop when he saw us. And the driver, an older woman with gray hair, pulled back in a ponytail, rolled down her window looking shaken. "Did you see them?" she asked before either of us could speak, her voice trembling. "The kids in the road about 2 miles back." just standing there. Officer Ramirez and I exchanged glances, and he quickly approached her truck while I stood guard watching the road. She explained that she'd seen 3 figures in yellow raincoats near a pull-off area down the mountain. But when she checked her mirrors after passing, they were gone. The officer immediately called for backup to search that location, suspecting the criminals were working multiple spots or had moved their operation after seeing the police lights. The woman, whose name was Gloria, said she'd been driving this route for 15 years and had heard stories about Dead Man's Curve, but never believed them until tonight. While we were talking, another call came through on Officer Ramirez's radio. A motorist had just reported seeing a white van speeding down the mountain on a service road that ran parallel to the highway heading toward the valley. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Officer Ramirez told Gloria and me to continue to the next town and file official reports at the station, but I couldn't just leave without knowing more. I asked if I could follow him to wherever they were searching for that van. And surprisingly, he agreed, probably figuring a witness might be helpful if they caught anyone. We formed a small convoy, his patrol car leading, my rig following, and Gloria behind me, descending the mountain carefully while more police units raced past us, heading up to secure the curve. About 10 minutes later, we reached an old way station that had been closed for years, and there it was, a white van with its engine still warm, abandoned behind the building. The back doors were open, revealing exactly what we'd feared. 3 child-sized mannequins dressed in yellow raincoats, along with several more in various outfits. There were also tools, rope, and what looked like electronic equipment for monitoring police scanners. But the people responsible were nowhere to be found, having apparently fled on foot into the surrounding forest. The police brought in dogs and searched all night, but the rain had washed away most of the scent trail. They did find footprints leading to a creek where the tracks disappeared, suggesting whoever it was knew exactly how to evade tracking. Inside the van, they discovered notebooks with detailed information about trucking routes, delivery schedules, and specific cargo manifests. These people had been studying their targets for months. What really made my skin prickle was finding my own company's logo on one of the papers along with notes about the electronic shipments we regularly hauled through that pass. Officer Ramirez showed me a map they'd found with dozens of red marks along various mountain roads throughout California and Oregon. Each mark dated and annotated with codes they were still trying to decipher. The FBI got involved the next morning, treating it as organized cargo theft across state lines. They interviewed me for 3 hours, going over every detail, every second of what I'd experienced. Turns out similar schemes had been reported in Washington and Idaho. Always using the same method, mannequins designed to cause crashes or emergency stops, always targeting specific types of cargo. They never caught the people responsible, at least not that I ever heard about. The authorities installed more cameras, increased patrols, and put out alerts to all commercial drivers about the mannequin scheme. For weeks afterward, truckers would share stories on the CB about close calls and suspicious figures on mountain roads. I finished my delivery to Elko a day late and had to explain everything to my dispatcher who'd already heard about it on the news. When I finally got home that weekend, I hugged Amy and Sophia longer than usual, unable to explain why I was so shaken by what should have been just another hazard of the job. I still drive that route sometimes, and yes, I still slow down at Dead Man's Curve. Even in perfect weather, other drivers do too. You can tell the ones who know the story by how their brake lights flare up before that bend. The worst part is the uncertainty that stays with you. Every time I see something on the side of the road at night, even just a trash bag or a piece of tire, I wonder if it's them starting up again. If tonight's the night another driver won't be as lucky as I was. The company installed dash cameras in all our trucks after my incident, and I keep that footage saved on my phone. 3 yellow figures in the rain that nearly cost me everything. Proof that sometimes the real monsters are just people with a plan.